Welcome to the Tribute Lounge. I'm Mark Fawcett, and today I have the great pleasure of having Justin Clark, aka Jay Stone, one of the lead designers at K2 Snowboards, with us on the show.
Thanks for having me. This is a dream.
Wow.
I've been watching the show for a while. You guys do some awesome stuff, and yeah, super stoked to be here.
It's evolving, but like you are one of the first. We had Jeremy Jones on here very recently, and you know he's super involved with all his equipment and everything, but not like at your level. Like you're like super hands-on board designer, hotshot rider. Like wait till we see like I really appreciate that and seeing an engineer that can actually shred too. Like you speak both languages.
Yeah, for sure.
I know from my past, I never got my hands super dirty. A few times building boards and such, but I had to parlay and chat with an engineer who had no snowboard experience on what to do. And so let's rewind back here a bit, because from my understanding, one of your first kicks at the can with building boards and stuff was with Stony. With POW Surfers.
Yeah, Stony Surfers. Yeah. Oh, you're digging deep for this. I love it.
Well,
this is great.
But what, like, as a young man at the point, you had just graduated uni or something ish?
No, I don't know if I was in school.
You were in school?
Yeah, I was just starting engineering school at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I was working at Milo Sport in Salt Lake City. I worked there for 7 years, which opened up this entire world to me. I was so lucky to get to work there. I mean, you know how important core shops are to the snowboard community.
Milo's like an industry legend, iconic shop in Salt Lake.
It's a staple for the community out there. So I was working there, and I was always super into product. You know, like I loved geeking out on all the specs, how all the bindings work, the whole 9 yards. And at that point, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with school. I was going to school, kind of just going through the motions. I always liked science, so I was doing some science stuff. And I was actually working with a guy, Brandon Hammond, who is old pro snowboarder for Arbor. Some insane video parts. So he worked at Milo as well, was going to school for engineering at that time. And I would always, peek over his shoulder at work, check out what he was doing. And it sort of just clicked one day, like, oh, I want to be an engineer and I want to design snowboards. And right when that happened, I was like, okay, well, how do I get this going? Because I hate sitting around and just like when I have an idea or something, I just want to move on it. And I realized, okay, I don't have enough money or resources to make snowboards, but I think I can make POW surfers. And that's how it all started.
Sweet.
And so I built my own vacuum bag, I shaped my own mold, and I just started pressing POW surfers at my parents' house in my dad's shop, and that's how it got rolling.
Awesome.
And so that was my intro to working with fiberglass, working with all sorts of composites. And at that same time, I was helping work for Vert Snowshoes. Yeah, so that guy, Pete Carney, legend, he really gave me my first true intro into manufacturing and understanding injection molding and all this stuff. And so it was like full on at that point. Once I decided engineering was it was like, all right, how can I get my hands into every little aspect I can?
Awesome.
Yeah, it was rad.
Cool. And then we fast forward a few years.
Yep.
How did you just walk into K2 and be like, I'm doing this? Like, how did you stumble upon that?
I wish. I mean, it was a lot of hard-working years to get there for sure. So with doing the POW surf thing and working at Milo, and obviously Milo is just, there's so many pro snowboarders there. And at that time, I was also repping for Solomon. And so Chris Grenier is a good friend of mine. He came into the shop one day, and he
shout out Bombhole.
Yep, for sure. But yeah, I was working one day, and he rolls into the shop, and he's like, "All right, Jay Stone, Solomon's giving me a new pro model, and I don't know what the hell I want to do. So, do you want to design it for me?" And I was just like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, just like we were riding a bunch together, at Brighton." He's like, "You know what I like? What do you think? I don't have any ideas." And it was just like, holy shit, I'm going to be able to design a board for a huge company, you know? And I'm not even done with school or anything like that. Like, he just saw me making pow surfers. He knew me from the shop. We were boarding together. And so that was the catalyst that started it all. So I did that project. It was the 6-piece. And so it was the first board I ever did with him. And then from there, Niche Snowboards, they're out of Salt Lake City as well. Rad company, like all super eco-friendly stuff. Same thing, they saw the pow surfers, I was making them, and they knew me from Milo as well. And they're like, hey, will you design a pow board for us? And this is all for free. But it was like all this experience that I could get. You know, I could work for the Solomon factory and then the Capita factory where Niche was made at that time, and start, you know, getting all these little accolades under my belt. And then by the time it came around, I was supposed to go work for Capita, actually, and just last second, some things fell through the cracks, and I had met Tom Johnsen, who's the brand director for K2 Snowboarding, at an SAA about 6 months prior, and he saw that I was still in Salt Lake when I was supposed to be in Europe, and he DMs me, and he's like, what are you doing? I was like, oh, some crazy stuff happened, just didn't work out. Next day, get an email, and they're offering me the head engineer job for snowboards. And he just fully vouched for me. He's like, this is our guy. And so I flew up there, met everyone, and it was done deal. And that's how it all came to be. Pretty crazy, yeah.
So cool.
So a lot of work and a lot of long hours. And yeah, I wasn't even finished with school when they offered me that job, which was crazy. So,
but it's not all, I mean, obviously there's all sorts of like amazing things you can learn in school that you're going to apply.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's an art to, you know, building a snowboard and every little detail that goes into it.
100%.
That you're not going to learn in engineering school.
Yeah, you can learn, like, I did emphasis in composites, so I got to learn how fiberglass and carbon and all that stuff works. But at the end of the day, you need to understand how a board needs to move across the snow and how it needs to feel under your feet.
Exactly.
So you can take that, you know, all the science and manufacturing stuff you learn and then apply it to this art form, which it truly is.
It really is.
It's pretty crazy.
It really is. So you have some boards here.
Yeah.
So it's super cool.
Yeah.
You were riding at Baldface like 4 hours ago.
Yeah, first time there was unreal.
The boards are still wet.
They're still wet. They have some Baldface moisture on them.
Can I just bring this one up straight away?
Yeah, for sure.
And this is a prototype board.
Yeah, so
it's unnamed.
Yeah,
which
unnamed.
Is fine.
Yep.
Which is fine. And then what direction were you going? Let's hold this up so people can see. I love this general shape.
The green is so good.
And the green's really good.
Yeah.
The green's really good. So what's your inspiration behind this particular board?
So I guess I'll give a little backstory on what we did up at Baldface just for the trip. So it was my first time there, and obviously it's like powder heaven, you know? And so I wanted to design a quiver just for the trip. And so pretty insane.
Boy,
right?
that's a luxury and a half.
And I think that's one of the raddest things about K2 is like there's so much creative freedom that I get and just to try stuff and try new shapes. So I designed 6 shapes for the trip for everyone to ride. So everything from a 169 to a 145.
Wow.
And everyone was ripping. And so it's just, you know, like different experiences that you're going to get with riding powder. Like if you have a super long board, obviously it's going to be really fast, but slower turning. If you have, you know, a tiny little fishtail, it's going to be nimble through the trees. And so it's just what experiences and feelings can you get while riding powder. And so for this one, this is definitely a favorite of mine. It's a 59, 268 waist width, so pretty wide, 26 millimeters of taper.
Quite a bit.
Quite a bit more nose than tail.
Yeah.
7.3 meters side cut here. And then it's mostly camber with a tiny bit of early rise in the tail, or in the nose, and then a nice flat tail so you can maximize the surface area in the tail of the board.
Beautiful.
So yeah, the whole idea of this board is just, you know, it's supposed to be super easy to pivot off your tail, but has so much nose that it flies through POW. You can't go over the bars on this thing. It's pretty insane.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Do we have another board?
Yeah, we have the 169, which is
also... Let's pull that out.
Yeah. This is kind of like this is sort of like your Mount Bachelor killer right here.
I love it.
So like more low angle POW. And yeah, just like I'd never been to Baldface before, but I heard, you know, there's some super steep runs and then there's some mellower runs. I thought, well, I mean, if you want to go super fast and lay out some slashes on a mellower slope, a big board will do it.
100%.
So this thing's rad. So it's an effective edge of only a 160.
Yeah.
So it doesn't ride super big and it's not super stiff, but you can maximize so much of the surface area and you really lean forward and accelerate through flat spots. Like, this is the trailblazer, you know, if you're setting the pack for like a windlip or something, like you want to be on this board for all your buddies behind you.
100%. And that's a legit Swallowtail.
Yeah.
Like those are flexing, like those are flexing independently. Super independently. Yeah. And I will say my longest board that I own right now, which is a 181, but it's a super classic winter stick. Yeah. I mean, the Swallowtail's this long.
Oh yeah, I know that board.
That's my tightest turning board.
Yeah.
Like I could like, the thing's insane. Like pinballing through the trees.
Yeah, and what people don't really think about when you're, you know, riding a Swallowtail with this deep of a Swallowtail is when you really push through the back foot of the board, you can flex this whole section of the side cut so much more and create the tightest turns. So if you know how to use the board to your advantage, this thing will do super long, drawn-out turns or crazy tight turns just by how you pressure the edge and move your weight back and forth. So they're a lot of fun.
So cool.
Yeah.
Did you not have an Alchemist in
here?
Yeah,
I brought an Alchemist, which is
okay.
This was
so this thing. So I was sniffing around pretty hard on the website.
Yep.
And I mean, this thing's got all the bells and whistles as far as I can tell.
Yeah, it's insane.
Like everything.
Yep.
Let me just start with the guts of this thing, which is the core, because I was like looking at the core on this, and I mean it's super intricate.
Yeah.
So a standard Joe Schmo wood core, linearly vertically laminated.
Yep.
Like stringers, whatever you want to call them.
Yep.
You know, laminated all together. It's easy to create because you can make a block this big and just fillet cores off of them. This thing's insane. I mean, you got two 30-degree like off of both feet coming off of like, not horizontal,
right
30s, which is like everything about it is like really complicated to build. I would love to see how it's done on building the core for this thing.
This thing, it's so tech.
Do they make one core at a time, or are they building a stack somehow?
So when we started designing this core, we had to do them one at a time to figure it out.
I bet.
And then once we got the process dialed, and we started, because before we were doing each individual finger joint separately, laying it all in by hand, clamping it all, sanding it, getting it all smooth.
Like the core would be $1,000.
Yeah, it was like ridiculous. Like you could put the core itself on a wall and it'd be an art piece.
Yeah,
you know,
for sure.
It looks unreal. And so we, started out making them one by one, and then as we developed the manufacturing process, we figured out how to make it into blocks.
Yeah.
Then we could cut them out, and then you save a lot of time that way. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. That's how you have to do it, pretty much, or you'd have a $3,000 snowboard.
Yeah, exactly.
So that, and then what is your mindset, or if you could explain to us why 30-degree laminates going this way, and they go all the way through?
Yeah, all the way through the edge, underneath your inserts. So the whole idea of that is, so wood is going to be the stiffest in the grain, in the direction of the grain, right? So when you have your standard grain running tip to tail like this, the core, when you're going from edge to edge, is actually not as stiff. And so by putting the grain going into the direction of the edge, when you go from heel to toe, it's so much more responsive within the core. So if you were to take just the raw core blank in your hand and you were to grab it up in the nose where it doesn't have those angled sections, you can flex it a decent amount. And then you grab it where those angled sections are into the bindings, and it's just rock solid. Like it is, and that I think makes this board ride so well for being a more aggressive freeride board, is because it has so much response, it's effortless.
Yeah, so it's super, basically you did it, the design concept was increase response, like mega.
Yeah.
And you can't really do that with composite.
Yeah, you can, it's just, this I think has a much greater effect. It's like the core is the backbone of your snowboard.
Yeah.
And so if you can increase that effect right under your inserts, I mean, that's the way to go. And then as well, with those 30 degrees, so the whole idea of that is, you know, if it was just running straight out from under your inserts, it's only a smaller section. So you'd have to basically build that out. And then your core is going to get softer because you have less tip to tail wood. So the angled sections here give you more distribution out to the edge with, you're basically like maximizing the amount of area that you can use. And those angled pieces also give you better edge pressure.
For sure.
So you can really like lock in, hold an edge. And this core design is in all of the landscape boards. So we have an entire freeride collection of boards, and they all have a version of this core.
I did see that there were a few of them like that, for sure.
Yeah,
That's amazing. And then obviously some super composite tech still, in these, in the tip and tail, both?
So just in the tip of this one,
and
then Sage's board, the Antidote, has it in the tip and the tail.
Gotcha.
And so that board came from this board. We basically wanted to make a directional twin, like more freestyle version
twinny
of it.
one for him.
Yeah. And so the spectral braid here, so it's a mouthful, but it's an American-made aerospace grade pre-cured fiberglass.
Cool.
So basically, the company who makes most of the carbon fiber and fiberglass for NASA, for all the space shuttles, they make this material. So that's where the name Spaceglass comes from.
Yep, and it's in there because, I mean, I know the answer, but I want you to tell people.
Yeah, so the big thing with this, it reduces swing weight and it reduces tons of chatter out of the board. So when you're on edge, all the chatter is really going to resonate from the tip of your snowboard and then come through the rest of the edge. And if you can minimize that, you can keep your edge, what I call quiet, while you're carving, and that's going to be able to lock in your edge and hold it a lot better. So that's the whole idea with the Spaceglass, is reduce a lot of chatter, reduce extra swing weight, because it's so thin but so strong.
Gotcha.
So it's pretty rad tech.
I mean, you're kind of winning both ways there.
Yeah. It's hard to balance that.
Then another thing that, and this would have been tricky to do from what I saw, if it's still in there, there's 3 different radiuses on this side.
All right, so this one's actually, it's a quadratic side cut, which, so we can get into that a little bit. I think, or at least when I started working at a shop, I heard the word quadratic. You know, I hadn't taken that many math classes yet, and I was like, oh, so it must be 4 side cuts or something, like 4 radii.
Yeah.
But quadratic comes from the quadratic equation, which is, if you remember, like y equals x squared.
Yep.
So you basically do a super complex version of that equation that draws out your side cut curve.
Exactly.
And that's what this is. And so you can manipulate that equation to get it, say, to be a little bit less aggressive in the tip, more aggressive in the center, or right under the binding. You can tweak it a million different ways to get the feeling that you want.
And if you tried it, like, it wouldn't even necessarily come back on itself. Like, a radial side cut obviously is like
the circle.
You're taking a part of the circle, and it's that radius.
This
would be, you know, it could be like really tight and then really straighten out and then hook again at the end. And from what I saw, at least, and then, so from what I saw, it's tight, straighter, even tighter than the front.
Yeah, for sure.
And then what's the reasoning behind that?
So since this is a majority camber board, if you put too flat of a side cut on it, when you're trying to rail a turn, it's just going to want to roll straight. Because if you look at a photo of someone doing a turn, their board's in a fully rockered out position because they're creating that curve. So with a full cambered board like this, you have to flex through all the camber to then really engage a tight turn. So by doing, say, a little bit tighter side cut in the front, you can get the board to hook up on edge quicker when you really put it over. But say when you're just flat basing at really high speeds, going into a jump or a side hit or whatever, and you're just on edge a little, you're really engaging this mellower side cut between the feet, and that's going to track the board straighter and be more predictable. So it's just all about creating a dynamic ride. And then the little bit tighter side cut out the tail. So when you're really pushing super hard out of a turn, you can, like we were talking about with the Swallowtail, you can flex that tail and crank it out.
It'll complete the turn.
More, but it's full camber, so it's not gonna just like whip you like crazy unless you really push on the tail to get it to turn and do what you want.
Gotcha. Does this board have taper?
Yeah, it does. This has 5 mil taper.
Okay.
Or sorry, 6 mil taper.
Gotcha.
So it's like, this is our flagship freeride board. All the tech goes into this one, and it sort of trickles down from there.
Like I said, like all the tech is in this, everything, like a huge description next to each tech component in this one.
Yeah, this was the first board I got to design when I started at K2.
Oh, cool.
We had a board called the Joy Driver, and I rode it one run at Mount Hood and ripped my bindings off it, and I was like, this is the worst snowboard I've ever ridden. Go into some meetings, and I was like, we need to design a new freeride board. And everyone was on the same page, like, all right, let's do it. And they gave me like an unlimited budget to try anything, do anything, and they're just like all new tech, whatever your brain can produce, go for it. So it was just like, you know, kid in a candy store at that point. Like, I finally have resources to make all of these ideas come to life, and that's what came from this board. And it was
so cool.
And this one won Board of the Year it came out, which was insane.
Amazing.
Yeah, and that was like, holy shit, maybe I can do this, you know?
Yeah.
It was
awesome. Yeah, you
unreal.
can. Yeah. And I mean, like, such an art form. It's beautiful. Like, we didn't talk really, other than the side cuts there, didn't talk much at all about the blends and like, do you find that might be where like the art comes in when you're creating a board, is like trying to blend like when the camber comes off in relation to like where the side cut starts to go the other way?
For sure. Yeah. Like, I guess how I explain to people about what board design is, it's kind of like baking. You know, we pretty much know all the ingredients that are out there that you could use to bake something, but it's how you sprinkle in each little ingredient to make it magic, you know, and that's really what it comes down to. It's how you have your core profile come into where the rocker section starts, and what type of side cut you use with that core profile. And every little detail makes such a difference in the way the board rides.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild.
I like that you brought up core profiling, because I actually have an old friend that used to make, and I worked with closely to make all our race boards back in the day. And he was all like super nerd about core profiling. Like that, he was like, that's for him. He's like, this is the art of the snowboard, is like this core profiling.
For sure.
And it's complex.
It is super complex.
Amazing. Hey, I would like to super thank you for deep diving in on board nerding with us. I mean, was there anything else you wanted to chat about with this board?
There's a cool thing in here called spectral braid. That's a pretty rad one. We have a patent on that.
Oh, I saw that.
Yeah, so this is pretty wild. So kind of like how we talked about, you know, wood has strength in the direction of its grain.
Yeah.
So any composite, so a fiberglass or carbon fiber, so whatever direction that fiber is going, it's stiff in that direction. And so with this board, what I wanted to do is I wanted to make something that was hard charging and you could really rip it, but I like boards with a little bit of torsional flex. And so normally when you add torsional flex into a board, say between the bindings, you thin the core out.
Yep.
And so then you get a little more twist with your feet, which is great, makes the boards more maneuverable. But then from this section here, when you thin that core out, it's going to be softer, right?
Yeah.
So then you're like, okay, well, what's the balance there?
Yeah.
But with this, we have this fiber system that runs completely tip to tail through the board, and you can tweak the torsional flex and the tip to tail flex independent of themselves with just the fiber. And so if you're in a shop and you check this board out, you can look through. So we have all these transparencies through the graphic. Yeah. So we have a 45-degree fiber in the tip and the tail. So it's torsionally the stiffest here. And then if you watch the fibers, you can see how they change angle so that fiber comes more tip to tail between your bindings.
Gotcha. So you increase the longitudinal stiffness here, but
it softens it up
torsionally.
Yeah. So this is the only snowboard that has any fiber system like that out there. Cool. And how they make it is it basically looks like they're 3D printing the fiber onto the board. It's nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's so cool. Like trying to like hand maneuver individual strands is like there's like hundreds and hundreds in each board. Wow. It's really cool. So I think that's a pretty exciting one. So is that just on the Alchemist?
Just on the Alchemist, and the material's super expensive.
I bet.
And so this is our most expensive board, and it makes the most sense to put it on this board. So that's why it's here. Gotcha. But that's a rad one that was a pretty cool one to implement into a snowboard.
Is there anything when you are, because you've built, and I saw like on your Instagram, like a whole lineup of boards. Not to mention you just built some for fun to bring here.
Yeah.
But is there anything that sort of like, that has your fingerprints on it that's like across the line, where you're like, like, that's a J-Stone board because it's got whatever it is, this blend or this length of rocker or something, or?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, that's always so hard because our line is so big that, say like our more intermediate boards versus the super high-end boards, there's a lot of difference in the feel of those boards and what you're going to get out of them. But I think one thing I really try to focus on is the torsional flex aspect. Like I think for me that makes or breaks boards. Where if it just feels like an absolute plank underneath your feet and you just can't maneuver the board, unless you're like absolutely railing turns. I think that's where torsional flex is awesome, to be super stiff here.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So there's a time and a place for 100%.
Yeah. Vaughn Wildcard, shout out.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have one of those.
Yeah.
and it's stiff in here, and I love it.
Yeah.
For 80% of the riding, I love it. There's
Yeah.
certain things I would not use it for.
For sure. Like you look at like slalom boards and stuff, they're so stiff here and they taper out so much with tons of effective edge.
Yeah.
So you can bend the tips and tails to create the turn, but it's so solid here.
Yeah.
So for me, I love that feeling of the little bit looser torsional flex. I think it just goes a long way for most riders out there.
In the coach world, we call that pedaling.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know
if
you've heard that one before, but
that's the term I use as well.
You should be able to like pedal the board a bit, have the front end, and I love doing that. Like, can I get the front end to start and then finish off with the tail?
Yeah. And really that extra torsional flex, being able to pedal the board, is so helpful with wide boards. How many shapes there are nowadays. If you have a plank underneath your feet and it's super wide, I mean, the board's just taking you for a ride.
Yeah.
And that's where like the excavator is an awesome one. It has a lot of torsional flex, and that's I do biax glass in that one as well.
Yeah.
And that makes it much easier.
For sure. There's no 45 component that makes it torsionally stiff.
Yeah. None of that extra resistance.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
Yeah.
We could go down like some serious rabbit holes here with like nerd tech, but I really want to thank you for coming down here.
Of course.
And chatting with us. And again, if you're watching the show and you want to see more, this was great. Like, you were like the scienciest guy we've had on yet. This is awesome. Like our YouTube channel, Tribute Lounge, and subscribe. And Jay Stone, thanks so much for coming by, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Sick.
Appreciate it. Yeah, anytime.